I've had occasion in life to meet people who, through their energy, gifts, and inspiration, added real value to both society and the people around them. The fact that they had wealth as a result was really secondary. They did something or invented and produced something that rewarded them because it was valued by society. People who create value benefit most when they are in free conditions, and therefore we can expect free conditions to produce the most such people, and therefore the most prosperity for all. I understand that there are people who don't see things the way that I'm describing them. There are things about our system that are unjust, which I've described in other videos, but the fact that the system does, in some percentage of time, produce individuals who are then free to create things that add value to human life gives it some merit versus the systems of places that crush the spirit of a larger percentage of the population. I'm not using any statistics in this observation, just a whole bunch of anecdotes from decades of dealing with businesses and business owners. I've met some truly exceptional people, both in terms of their abilities and the merits of the rules and principles by which they live. That's not to say that there aren't various kinds of grifters who also happen to be well established and moneyed. They always seem to be with us under any system. It's possible for good people to get crushed and bad people to be rewarded. But the system under which you want to live will reward the good more than the bad. And when a society becomes one in which those incentives are reversed, life conditions diminish and decline into something closer to the Hobbesian. If you look at most of the good things in your life in terms of inventions and services, you may find that while it is not necessarily being delivered by a person such as I describe, it could likely have been invented by such a one and then co-opted by investors to offer it at scale. My point in saying this is that many of the good things that we get from society are the result of somebody being free to make a choice. Rather than belaboring that point, I'll mention that there's a book that articulates this better than I ever could, and it's called Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. We seem to be in a time, well, we are in a time of political violence. We're all sitting here with our ideas about the way the world should be, and everybody wants to rule the world. For the violent actor, there's something inside them that says if the world could be just exactly the way that conditioning has told me it should be, then everything will be perfect. That mental arrangement whereby someone is conditioned to believe that the alternative to the fulfillment of their indoctrinated ideology is the worst possible universe, which must be thwarted at all costs, that is a strong impetus to political violence. That's what we have in people who kill for ideology. The condition wherein somebody will kill to make the world fit their conditioning is observable in the present and the past. Just because a worldview has gained primacy in a majority of people doesn't mean it will create the ideal outcome. History has multiple examples of bad ideas being put into practice at scale and over a long period of time, resulting in the deaths of tens of millions of people and the destroying of tens of millions of lives. It's hard to convey this concept of consequences when people want to deny this historical fact because its cause looks similar to their desired path, or it hurts the conditioning with which they are identified. That's been impressed upon them by media, which is controlled by moneyed interests to program them. Like how if you hear a song that you don't really like for the first time, but then you hear it 100 times and eventually you love it. That's how it is. So then make that song something else, an ideology, a worldview, and get somebody conditioned to identify with it by just continued exposure over a long period of time, and then threaten that thing with which they become identified. Now, not all of those people are going to react violently, but when the audience is hundreds of millions of people, you can bet that some of them will. When you've lived to see multiple generations raised and been around those from generations before you were born, and you live on a technological inflection point that accelerates the creation of generation gaps, by increasing accelerating the intake of content that creates it, you see the extent to which the egoic structure that's created in a person is a function of the time in which they were born. People don't change over generations, just the programming that goes into them. There are certain ways that people will react given certain stimuli, and it can be predicted when you do it to a large number of people. You can look at the mass of humanity as just a programmable composite of beings. And if you drop any random chunk of those souls into any part of the historic timeline, subjecting them to the same conditions and conditioning that their historical predecessors endured, they're going to look just like those people who arose from those circumstances in real life. It won't be verbatim, but it will at least rhyme. There's no telling how the outcome of any one individual will be impacted by conditioning. You could get a sense of it, or what's in the hard coding at least, from twin studies, where siblings have been separated at birth, like twin siblings. We can see how much of their preferences were hard-coded in the flesh. But when you look at large numbers of people, the impact of conditioning can be much more predictable. Like, you can bet that certain percentages of the population are going to react in certain ways. It's like how, as you increase the sample size of the measurement of some natural feature, its distribution will converge into a bell-shaped curve. This is not new information. The mechanics of propaganda are understood. The effects of programming on an individual's outcome is harder to predict than that of a population. You know that if you expose a population to certain types of conditioning, that there will be outliers who will resort to direct action, and they will be the spearhead for whatever the programmers are hoping to accomplish through the exploitation of those actions or reaction to them. So you're conditioning, so you condition enough people, and the results form a bell-shaped curve, the upper tail of which is used as a spear. We have seen people kill for worldviews that, when established in a society, have brought about calamity. People will believe any stupid thing if it's hammered into them enough. The spirit that leads a society to discordia is the one that needs to control everything. It is the spirit of fear that needs to control all the variables, both in the present and into the future, and it's driven by the impressions in consciousness made by past conditioning. It is also driven by an idea of the past that must be rectified, as if that past were still with us. Ideologues point to a boogeyman that, if actually real, would deny them the use of the institutions and platforms from which they describe and malign him. The irony is that what will ultimately rise to take them from the seat of power will look a lot like the boogeyman they described, whatever that is. That boogeyman is always with us as human beings because we don't change. The boogeyman existed before, when the underlying reality of might makes right was closer to us. The boogeyman comes from survival instincts. And when, through rhetoric, large numbers of people are put in peril, it comes out. I use a lot of words when I could just as easily say something like brainwashing bad, but I'm hoping that in sifting through these details, we'll illuminate the inconsistencies and logical fallacies and delusions that bring about the consequence of people acting out violently against people who truly pose no threat to them immediately or even in the fulfillment of their ideals. You can't just call out brainwashing because the particulars of any individual's brainwashing came there without their actual realization. And then once it becomes legitimized as a part of their identity, it feels attacked in the face of critique. I'm not saying that there's any perfect society on the planet, only there are attempts at an approximation. But when you live in an environment in which people are freely allowed to express their ideas, it takes a lot to sell people on the merits of having that taken away, either de facto or de jure. Freedom of expression allows for people to truly be themselves, to explore and invent. Imagine living in a world where you are surveilled constantly and immediately censured for violating some contrived and therefore unnatural template of human expression and behavior. Without freedom, people just become like robots. That's the extreme. It's not a tolerable condition, and it's one that people will exit, if possible, when they realize that it has no end. Everything on the continuum from where we stand today to that extreme, it comes about through bad ideas. So everything between here and there is in the realm of bad ideas as it relates to free speech and freedom of expression. When enough people hold this spirit that needs to control everything, they can create the conditions wherein others who don't even hold this view are strong-armed into serving it and abiding by it. This is how we end up with something that acts like a Stalinist dictatorship type situation. It's the Clockwork Orange, the society wherein the people have to outwardly act a certain way, despite something inside of them crying out for freedom. It's through conditioning that people voluntarily step into it. And no, they don't do it all at once, but rather some portion is conditioned and radicalized to impose it on others who value the immediate safety of compliance in the face of tyranny over the long-term consequence of coming under an ongoing control by such tyrants. Without the tools of critical thinking to recognize the logical fallacies within any set of bad ideas, we are vulnerable to this. Without a recognition of the power of conditioning and an understanding of how the lens of conditioning and identification with it colors our state of being, we can unwittingly immerse our attention in content that seeks to shape us into something that will work towards discordia. The system we have now is very much like that already, but there are worse outcomes possible still. At least in the current paradigm, you have the opportunity to disconnect and work on yourself spiritually and mentally.